All right, thank you everybody on Zoom for following us. It's the summer, so AU is normally a very quiet campus in terms of students, so it's great to see an audience here in person, still coming back from the pandemic, so we're still in hybrid mode. That's what we're doing virtual, and we're gonna be wearing our masks when we're not speaking and not eating as per AU policy, but we'll have a lunch during the second panel, so feel free to eat and keep your distance, to be socially distanced. So therefore, we're gonna get started. Today is June 23rd of 2022, my wedding anniversary. My wife's not watching, but I had to mention it. And we're here to talk, we're here to celebrate a great city, Barcelona, in the great state of the autonomous community of Catalonia, and an interchange with American cities, in particular, Washington, DC, and New York City. And we're going to talk about immigration research, which tells us about immigration realities. Not what we see and hear in the media, but what happens in the streets, what happens with the people. That's what we're going to be trying to approach from different disciplinary, academic, and policy approaches. I want to thank a lot the delegation to the United States of the Generalitat de Catalunya, or the government of Catalonia. Thank you so much for sponsoring and making it possible for Ricardo Zapata to be here. We're gonna be hearing from him in a minute. He is the father of interculturalism in terms of immigrant integration, so we're really lucky to have him at AU, and that's possible thanks to the delegation of Catalonia to the United States. We thank the College of Arts and Sciences, our sponsor, in so many ways. Chadney, who is in the front, helping, and all the staff from AU, from media to different people. I also want to thank Magali, for all her help. They're organizing this event and making it possible. We also have the Transatlantic Policy Center, which is a Jean Monnet Center of Excellence, funded by the European Union, who also is sponsoring the project. The Sociology Department is also a sponsor, providing lunch for us today. And our partners are the Universitat Pompeu Fabra, where Professor Zapata is a faculty member, and his GRITIN, which is an immigration lab, similar to what we have here, but much more established, much longer trajectory than our immigration lab here. We're also going to hear about the EU Belonging Project from Javier in a minute. And also we have Florispace and HERA projects in the European Union. So without further ado, welcome everybody. And we're going to have now Isidre Sala, who is the delegate of the government of Catalonia to the US, to do the official presentation. And then he's going to present our moderator, Nuria Villanova. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ernesto, and thank you very much, everyone, for being here, both the people who are online and in person, of course. We are very pleased to be here and participate in this very interesting event. Because, you know, our mission is to enhance cooperation between Catalonia and the US. And of course, this is a very general topic, but when we found an angle in a specific area in which we believe that this is an interesting topic, we jump in very quickly. And definitely, this is today's topic is something for us very enriching and very interesting. And it coincides very good with the values we share and partake. So the Catalan government has a Ministry of Equality and Feminism that has created as a response to our commitment towards equality, starting a real transformation in our country. So the ministry is tasked with leading a feminist transformation and with promoting an intersectional gender and egalitarian mainstreaming approach to all government action. So that means that within these competences, the ministry has not only the portfolios regarding gender equality, but also competence in migration, anti-racism, non-discrimination, LGBTI rights, and human rights promotion. That gives the capacity to intervene in all government areas in relation to equality and non-discrimination, based on the principle of intersectionality and the respect of human rights. Let me put two examples of these policies related to today's event. So first is the anti-racism laws and policies. Since December 2020, the Ministry of Equality and Feminism initiated the public consultation process of the draft act against racism in all its forms and expressions, encompassing both structural and institutional racism. The purpose of this legislative initiative is to combat all ideologies that promote hatred, racism, and racial discrimination, whether based on skin color, phenotype, origin or nationality, religion, or other ethnic or racial characteristics, and specifically in our country, in Catalonia, anti-Romanism, Islamophobia, and xenophobia, which is racism against migrant populations. And second is the National Pact for Interculturality and Dignified Living that seeks to express the commitment of institutional, social, economic, political, and citizen actors in the creation of a shared sense of belonging, driven by principles such as equality, from an intersectional perspective again, recognition of diversity, and positive interaction. This plan entails the detection of areas of improvement, inequalities, and granting of fundamental rights. And it's organized around three different axes. First is actions against discrimination and inequalities, such as redistributive measures, equal access to opportunities, observation and monitoring of inequalities patterns. Second is the politics of recognition, such as the anti-racist work, memory work, diversifying representation, cultural references, and shared heritage to foster a collective sense of belonging. And third is the positive interaction, tackling social segregation of promoting community building. So we are therefore, as Catalans, Europeans, members of the Western culture, embark in constantly searching formulas to build a real culture of diversity that will enable to share the space where we live in constructive ways. And the program You Belong is going to be a perfect example of that. We're going to learn about it in a minute. And you know, the United States has been a magnet for people all over the world for centuries, I would say. So we are also happy and eager to share and learn with you all these experiences and lessons learned from this incredible diverse nation. And projects like this, Migration Lab, and exercises like the one we are doing here today, it's an excellent example, and we are really enthusiastic about today's and to learn and in all different angles possible that we can hear today to build and consolidate the values we share. So thanks again for the invitation. Thank you very much, especially Professor Ernesto Castañeda and of course Ricard Zapata as well for reaching us and putting this idea on the table. Also, of course, the other speakers like Javier Alonso and Gloria Rendon for participating online. Also, thanks to our colleagues from the Ministry of Equality and Feminism in Catalonia that they have provided also technical advice on how to tackle this issue. They are the experts, not us. And of course, everybody present here today, the people in the delegation who has been cooperating, like Andrea, Magali, and Andrea. And of course, all the students here, because this is at least it's for you. So now it's my pleasure to introduce today's panel moderator, a fellow Catalan, the Professor Núria Vilanova. Núria is the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Studies and Associate Professor at the Department of World Languages and Cultures here in American University. Núria teaches Latin American culture, literature, and cinema, and her research is devoted to the impact of social change and migration on cultural production. So that's the perfect person for today, for sure. Núria, thank you very much, and we are ready here to learn from you.
Moltes gràcies, and bon dia a tothom, and thank you very much, and good morning, everybody, those on Zoom and those in person. It is very special for me because this is an intersection, this wonderful panel is an intersection of people from my two homes, Catalonia and now the United States. So it is quite special. And thank you, Ernesto, for inviting me to do that. So I try to go very quickly introducing our panelists and just leave them, you know, these are the ones who really know what they want to say and who have now, you know, the floor. So I'll very quickly introduce them. Then we will have time for Q&A that I'll be moderating along with you know, people moderating the Zoom as well. So I do hope that you will all be able to participate a bit later on this morning. So just very quickly, the panel, we have our dear colleague here, Ricard Zapata Barrero. He's a professor in the Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona and director, as Ernesto already mentioned, of the interdisciplinary research group of immigration in the Department of Political and Social Sciences in the Pompeu Fabra University. He's now currently a distinguished visiting scholar at the graduate school in the City University of New York, CUNY, and one of the leading representatives of the intercultural policy paradigm in Europe, partner of the ERA Plus Spacey project, and advisory member of the project EU Belong. Welcome to our university, Ricard. And we have also Xavier Alonso. He's joining us on Zoom. Xavier is a senior policy officer at the delegation of the government of Catalonia in the European Union, and he will introduce the project EU Belong. As I said, he is on Zoom. And then also joining us on Zoom is Gloria Rendon. She's an expert on design and execution of the policies of migration, innovative policies. So he helps to design them and execute them. And she's in Barcelona. And finally, but of course, not the last but not the least, is our dear colleague Ernesto Castañeda, who is the director of Immigration Lab here at AU and also associate professor in sociology in our Department of Sociology. Thank you so much, everybody. So with that, and without further ado, Ricard, it's your floor.
Thank you. That works. So, okay, I think that's works. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for your warm welcome, and I'll share with you the emotional side of this of this meeting, which is this kind of meeting between Catalonia and the states, university and policy. I think we spoke about that with Ernesto yesterday, that this is also our responsibility as researchers to promote this kind of interaction between different areas of knowledge production, I would say. I am very pleased that this event is finally taking place. I appreciate the commitment of the delegation of Catalonia for making it possible, together with Ernesto Castañeda. Following time instructions, it's really challenging to summarize the paradigm of intercultural policies in 50 minutes. The purpose I have is mainly to frame the debate that we seek to promote, which is to discuss the paradigm of intercultural policies from a conceptual and policy point of view at the city and regional level, asking ourselves how interculturalism can be a common ground for dialogue between Europe and American cities, Catalonia and also American cities. During my visit at the CUNY Graduate Center, I learned that this could be already a challenging issue. A few weeks ago, we hosted a talk of my last co-edited book on contested concept in migration studies, and an American scholar, Professor John Molenkoff, directly argued that some of the selected concepts that we take in the book were too European, given as an example the concept of interculturalism. He literally argued that it was not a concept of the US conceptual migration agenda. So my starting premise is to what extent interculturalism, which is penetrating European society as a policy paradigm to govern and to manage diversity, could be also American. And if no, why not? For this short talk, I have selected key information. There is many other issues that I am forced to leave aside, but which could be taken for the debate. I hope at the end to be able to give some answer to questions like what are the main distinguishing characteristics of intercultural policy paradigm, why now in Europe, are there different currents in intercultural debate, and to what extent the territorial scale, which will be one of my main guiding traits of this talk, affect the meaning and its use. And finally, how can interculturalism guide also the governance of diversity in American cities? I always like to begin by describing what I call the great paradox of our time. Our societies already accept globalization as an irreversible trend in our societies, marking our historical stage of interconnected people, countries, markets, but we have still a lot of difficulties accepting one of its byproducts, the fact that people move and our societies are becoming diverse in race, religion, culture, and ethnicity. Current debates around arguments such as too much diversity can threaten cohesion and stability, and even the American majority-minority debate that diagnoses as a problem that whites are becoming minorities in America, and even the social political movement such as the white supremacists on the debate on the great replacement are also proof that our societies still have many difficulties of normalizing differences and diversity. And we are still placed diversity within the folder of the others, since there are always a cynic, I will say, trend that assumes that whoever defines diversity never fall himself within this category. Diversity is always the others, not us. This is maybe legitimate to ask if national citizens are also diverse. These issues are important to me today because I feel that our political paradigm have also failed to stop this movement against diversity. I propose to place this debate within the historical continuum and see how the old paradigm, multiculturalism, is today bankrupt. Nobody wants to be identified today with the M word. The multicultural paradigm has basically been a state approach, concentrating its efforts in granting specific rights to those that are seen as disadvantaged in society due to the difference in terms of culture, ethnic, and racial identity. This compensation identity policy is governed by normative principles of equality and justice. The policy of difference, affirmative action in America, and compensation rights has been basic strategy. But today, there is a backlash to this model. Today, we are what I call the post-multicultural era. This is the name of my last book, Insight. This is the result of an academic diagnosis and public debate that multiculturalism has not delivered what it promised. Racism, discrimination, territorial segregation continue to challenge our diverse societies. Power relations based on ethnic origin continue to interfere. And there are already big challenges related to those who criminalize diversity and build arguments around the nexus that diversity threatens our cohesion and stability. There are even extreme statements that maintain that there is no possibility of society that is not homogeneous in cultural and national terms. In this environment, I will argue that intercultural paradigm give us a break and probably a bit space of optimism. Interculturalism as a policy paradigm attempts to address some of the challenges. In the first place, I will say more urgent the need to begin to build strategies so that diversity is accepted by all as a normal part of a society. This recognition basically means that diversity ceases to be an explanatory variable of inequalities and exclusion of power and power relations. The starting point has been a direct criticism to multiculturalism, since it is argued that multiculturalism has left aside one important aspect, the socializing aspect that requires living together in diversity. This means that the starting point is to ensure that people who live in society interact, since interaction is a key strategy for integration and the construction of citizenship. For interculturalism, the basic problem with multiculturalism is that it has focused too much on justifying differentiated rights and has underestimated as essential aspect contact between people of different origin, including national citizens. Following prominent contact theories, its basis is only through contact that we can reduce prejudice and racism, and it is through contact that we can promote mutual understanding and mutual acceptance. From the beginning, the focus of promoting interpersonal contact rather than separation, on focusing on what people share together rather than what separates them, as seen as a powerful policy approach that reduces the deficit of multicultural paradigm. Focus on cultural differences and focus on providing protection rights to differences. From the beginning, interculturalism in Europe has been seen as a community building and a cohesion-making policy for better respond to today's complex challenges of diversity. Contact is taken in a broad sense, and public space becomes the main space where contact takes place. Hence, the importance on how to configure public space in our diverse societies. Of course, not all contact produce benefits, and the debate about the conditions for positive contact can take place. Here we know from some contact theories that equality is an important condition. This means that in condition of inequality on power relation, contact can be a factor of racism and discrimination. In relation to territorial scales, the concept of interculturalism comes first from international relations and from the global sphere. Interculturalism has been used as a conflict resolution strategy to promote dialogue between regions and civilization, as a negotiation strategy to avoid war. Intercultural dialogue from international organization, principles of UNESCO, UN, and paradigm of alliance of civilizations. On another scale, interculturalism has been used in South American countries and even in Australia to frame social and political debate on the relationship between indigenous aboriginal people within the framework debate of tradition and modernity. In Lebanon, in many and many others multi-religious countries, interculturalism has been used as a forum for interreligious debate. Quebec is also well known for spreading the concept. It was like a reaction against the Canadian multicultural project that incorporated Quebec question within the same folder as the dimension of diversity, such as indigenous people, migrants, and Quebecois together. And Quebec found unacceptable and proposed its own approach to diversity, the intercultural paradigm based on the framework debate between diversity and the French tradition. Interculturalism is said to be the best way to ensure balance between diversity and the so-called survival of Quebecois society in the context of English prominence. In Europe, the intercultural paradigm has been introduced only recently, a decade ago, 10 years, not more, when the European Union declared in 2008 as the year of intercultural dialogue. But if we analyze documents and practices, we are immediately surprised by the different meanings of interculturalism. There are basically three meanings in the documents of European Union. The regional dimension that says that EU is a region, as a region seeks to promote intercultural dialogue with other regions in the world. The second is internal to European citizens, the idea to provoke intercultural encounters among European citizens through freedom of movement. The freedom of movement is based on intercultural also in Europe, because freedom of movement is the strategy of European Union to produce European identity. For example, and the third is also interculturalism to frame interstate European state relation. The use of interculturalism for the management of diversity related to migration has been possible also in 2008 with the program of intercultural cities in the Council of Europe. The idea was to promote interculturalism as a city project that addresses issues related to governance of diversity. Today, more than 150 cities are networked by the Council of Europe. And there are even national intercultural networks. We are now part, in Catalonia, promoting another scale, the regional scale, through the EU Belong project, which is unique also in Europe, as we will know today. What can we learn from these different uses? That scale of application shapes the perspective and could determine different debates. If we review the biography on the use of interculturalism, we can be surprised by its multifaceted use, and not always related to migration. So the debate of the use of interculturalism as a city strategy for managing diversity is rather a new debate. On the city scale, interculturalism becomes pragmatic, close to the needs and challenge of people. And we enter in the field of micro-policy, proximity policy, face-to-face relations. The management of public space become key area. Following the meaning of Habermas's critical theory, public space are, above all, space of communication and exchange. Today, severely problematized by consumer society and security. From urban planning, we also know that public space are public parks, squares, memorials, streets, playgrounds, community open markets, square, waterfronts, but they can also be neighborhood space, such as residential streets, community gardens, libraries, festivals. Contact can be practiced also in formal and informal settings. For many purposes and expectation, contact can be spontaneous, planned, mediated. It can be last seconds, minutes, hours, days, and even weeks. And we can contact can be repetitive and over time. Contact may be verbal and also non-verbal, which is very important to make use of body language. In racism, this is very important. All this variation of contact, time, space, intensity, degrees have different results, and normative paradigm, intercultural citizenship can accommodate it, this multifaceted variation of type of contact. Castles, a seminal work, shared with us some question about personal identity, very related to interculturalism. He say that today, the way people relate to each other, it's better say that the traditional who I am based on where I was born and who are my parents. Additionally, intercultural citizenship highlights the sense of place as a vital element of citizenship formation. This can include where people now live and feel belonging through everyday practice in the neighborhood at the city. In its roots, interculturalism means cultural exchange. So, by definition, it is a relational concept. It emphasizes the fact that two agents exchange their culture through the promotion of contact and exchange knowledge. Behind the policy narrative, there is a sense of equality, shared power, participation, human rights. Through contact, new citizen public identity emerges, recognizing the value of diversity as a new public culture, on what I call myself culture of diversity, which includes diversity awareness, diversity recognition, diversity participation, which is very important, and diversity representation. Within the premise, it is argued that the coexistence in diversity cannot be anything other than the product of citizen learning and result of socialization, an action that public powers must lead and therefore must be responsible for providing to the entire population. This socializing aspect, even engineering model of identity formation, is at the core of intercultural citizenship. Through this approach, belonging and membership are formed through spatial interpersonal relations rather than place of birth, national origin, any ascription trait of identity. We all know the negative side of diversity related to migration when there is not political intervention. Social unrest, racism, xenophobia, discrimination, inequality, unbalanced power relation, and so on. But perhaps less about the positive side of diversity in terms of social benefits. We must begin to socialize this word diversity as a public good. In this sense, intercultural citizenship does not only have a reactive dimension, since it can be seen as a conflict-based approach, and then understood as a mechanism to reduce conflict factors related to diversity, but most importantly, a proactive dimension in terms of fostering new form of citizenship, identity, and belonging, separated from birth and origin, new in terms of cohesion, social innovation, creative society, and solidarity. Here, the debate on diversity advantage takes place. Diversity seen as an asset for development, resource, opportunity. As a new urban scale, and I end with that, interculturalism becomes a global city project, an event city brand. In fact, the change of that urban policy and migration studies have heralded in this first decade of the 21st century, where it is not widely recognized that cities are playing an active role in the governance of diversity and are taking steps to build their own policy narratives rather than mere units or in a hierarchical, I will say, relation with the state, closely related to the trend of intercultural urban citizenship. As a citizen training policy, one of the central differences in relation to multiculturalism is that it addresses the entire population and not claim different treatment for those that are different on the basis of identity. This transversal dimension is probably one of these forces that make interculturalist policy inoffensive, I will say, and I will say also ideologically neutral. There is still a long way in research, both conceptual and empirical, to better configure intercultural urban citizenship. Since this implies promoting critical voice from the city themselves, demanding more autonomy, more power to better draw their own citizen narratives and belonging, separated from the traditional static and state visions of citizenship based on birth, for instance. There were probably operative categories during the last century, but clearly today, with transnational, complex, multiple varied identities that intersect of society, it makes obsolete to steal the credo of neo-nationalism of an imagined homogeneous population. It is probably against this, what I call myself, the new romanticism, that intercultural policy can provide tools that we should, and I will say very urgent today to try to have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ricard. And no, that was good. Yeah, that was good. So thank you for these enlightening remarks. And we are moving to Xavier Alonso, who is on Zoom, I think. Yes.
Hi, hello.
Hi, Xavier. Let me see if I can make you bigger. Or
This is me?
does that work? Okay, all yours, Xavier. And again, real quick, Javier Alonso, Senior Policy Officer at the Delegation of the Government of Catalonia at the European Union. Thank you so much, Javier, for joining us today.
Gracias, Gloria. Hola, saludos. Gracias, Ricard, Ernesto. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon from Brussels. In the name of the government of Catalonia, I would like to thank you very much for your kind invitation and personal interest in Catalonia. I'm glad to be here with you today. The government of Catalonia is engaged in several projects funded by the European Commission. 5 of those related to social integration, and just one related to or implemented abroad. This last project consists on creating actions in Morocco to inform potential migrants about the dangers of irregular migration and the opportunity for legal migration. The one that I'm going to tell you about this morning is called EU Belong. The Assembly of the European Regions lead it. The Assembly of European Regions, AER, is the largest independent network of regions in wider Europe, gathering regions from 35 countries inside and outside the European Union. EU Belong has 11 partnered regions, plus 3 experts, and we will be able to work together for 36 months until the end of 2025. The project's subheading is EU Belong, an intercultural approach to migrant integration in Europe's regions. The project is funded by the European Commission, which is evidence that they are committed to this philosophy. Partner regions belong to 8 EU member states, Catalonia and Navarra from Spain, Pomerania and Wielkopolska from Poland, Emilia-Romagna from Italy, Donegal from Ireland, Arad and Timis from Romania, Salzburg from Austria, Leipzig from Germany, and Västra Götaland from Sweden. The project is inspired by intercultural cities from the Council of Europe, and as Ricard said before, with nowadays with 156 participating cities. This fact that the project for the cities was born before gives us a clue regarding migration policy. If the regions have more weight in terms of population, territory, and political power, why do cities start internationalizing their migration policy earlier? Why do they have more experience in internationalizing their policy than European regions? At least this is the case of Barcelona in relation to Catalonia. Compared to Catalonia, Barcelona has fewer management responsibilities. Barcelona has about 25,000 employees, whereas the Generalitat of Catalonia about 170,000 employees. And Barcelona has fewer political responsibilities. Barcelona has had an uninterrupted performance over the centuries, while the government of Catalonia started to develop public policies and services only in 1977, right after the dictatorship. However, these are not sufficient reasons in my view. There is a very simple reason. I believe that Barcelona and Catalonia have had very different political leadership and political orientations over the last decades. And those differentiations led to different priorities and scenarios. What is interculturality? According to the Council of Europe's original project and the current EU Belong project, interculturality consists of 3 key words: equality, diversity, and meaningful interaction. An intercultural region should be a place where real equality is actively sought by preventing discrimination and adapting the region's governance, institutions, and services to the needs of a diverse population. Political leaders and most citizens regard diversity positively as a resource and understand that all cultures change as they encounter each other in the public arena. They advocate for a pluralistic region identity built around a shared vision and common values. And finally, a meaningful interaction between diverse groups in the public spaces and within the society is engineered throughout public policies that promote greater mixing, active citizenship, and participation. And how to reach these 3 objectives? Throughout 3 kinds of activities during 3 years. The project leader will provide us, stakeholders, with a set of analytical and practical tools, starting with a long questionnaire with 90 sections, whose exploitation allows each partner to have a first description of their policy available. This questionnaire will check parameters about general data like population, GDP per capita, composition of the population, whether foreigners, main ethnic or cultural groups, asylum seekers, irregulars, nationals. Data, policy data such as, has your region formally adopted public statements indicating their orientation or commitment to interculturality? Has your region allocated budget? Do your region have a dedicated body responsible for implementing the intercultural strategy? Data on education system, on neighborhoods, on business and labor market, on cultural and social life, on public space, on mediation and conflict resolution, language training, media, welcoming services, anti-discrimination, participation, and so on and so forth. After this analytical phase, we will be asked to carry out training and exchange of experiences. And finally, the expected outcome is that each of the 11 partners will create its own intercultural integration strategy. While preparing this presentation, I asked myself, why do a region has to emphasize or commit to a policy of intercultural integration? Why? In my opinion, and at least in the case of Catalonia, there is a perception that our policies are already intercultural, at least by the book, at least according to our laws, strongly based on equality. And at the same time, there is a threat of populism and the extreme right to gain political ground. Their discourse is anti-immigration. And then the government wants to emphasize interculturality, not because it is a new policy, but because it is a policy we already have and we want to consolidate, improve, and share it with other regions. At EU level, emphasizing interculturality means emphasizing the discourse of acceptance, openness, social integration on the basis of equality. It is also a way to counterbalance the current anti-immigration tendencies of some European societies and governments. Today is a well-known case of Hungary, but tomorrow could be the case of any other EU country. It is therefore a choice of openness, a choice. This European option for openness, for those who stand for it, is compatible with the European policy of improving border control. Another challenge of the EU Belong project is that our regions are very different in terms of political traditions, size of the territory, population, political culture, number of administrations of levels of government. In Catalonia, we have 5 different levels of government. Within the EU, there are countries with regions with a long political tradition, for example, with their own parliaments, and others with regions that have only some technical competences, let's say. Catalonia has independent legislative and executive powers, and even some competencies related to the judiciary. We also have an uninterrupted experience of intercultural policy since at least 1992, and I believe that the foundations of this policy go back even further to 1977, that is 45 years ago. The main basis of Catalan policy is to have a well-established discourse of integration created throughout the 20th century by politicians, trade union, media, and social leaders as a result of having lived through three great waves of immigration. One in the 20s, the second one in the 60s, and the last one between 2000 and 2010. That last one, an international wave. Another of these bases in Catalonia is the existence of large essential public services, health, school, social services that are universally accessible to all the population, including to undocumented foreigners. This is a very important basis for equality. Another basis for equality is to have a very progressive legislation on foreigners' rights developed continuously since 1985. At the same time, legislation that comes from the central state. At the same time, from the state. At the same time, several regional citizenship and immigration plans since 1992 have articulated hundreds of programs along the lines of cohesion and interculturality. And finally, let me end by saying that EU Belong is going to allow us to give continuity to our intercultural policy to the extent that we can share it with other regions and we can learn from them, of course. It will allow us to work in coordination and networking with these regions and probably help extend interculturality as a political commitment to all the regions in the future. Europe has hundreds of regions, and a lot more immigration is going to come to our countries in the coming years. Well, finally, in conclusion, I would like again to thank to the other 10 regions and to the Assembly of the European Regions for being able to work and learn together for more than 3 years until 2025. Thanks Washington again and all the organizers today for allowing us to explain our policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Xavier, for these very informative remarks on these important projects. And now we're going to move to Gloria. Is that correct? Perfect. Gloria?
Yes, I am here. Can you see me?
Yes. Yes.
Buenas tardes, buenos días. Muchísimas gracias por la invitación. I want to thank for the invitation. Ernesto, thank you. I am going my presentation in 3 small blocks. The first is about my situated point of view. The second about my view about the context in Spanish series. And in third point will be share with you some reflections or less visible lessons about my local experience. My viewpoints are like, firstly, as a woman, mother, and immigrant that has been living for more than 20 years in Barcelona. Secondly, as a professional specialized in design and implementation of programs and services to immigrants and refugees, most of them in Barcelona City Council. Finally, as an associated researcher in the Center of Studies in Migration at the Autonomous University of Barcelona and the University of Barcelona. After that, as Xavier say, Spanish cities at the end of the 20th century faced with a considerable increase in migration in their territories, set up specific strategies of reception, labeled as acogida in Spanish, acogida in Catalan, without a clear frame to do it. So one of the primary characteristics is the disparate resources for the specific inclusion of migrants. You can notice that I don't speak about refugees, only speak about migrants. But in the last 7 years, the context has changed. On the one hand, the diversity is a structural reality in many cities. On the other hand, new residents continue to arrive. But the biggest change in the last 7 or 8 years in attention to new residents has been the increase in asylum seekers. The cities, the Spanish cities specifically, have got considerable knowledge and social attention to migration, but not about refuge. Neither does it have the jurisdiction. The jurisdiction is the central state. As a transversal topic, migration and refugee, one big challenge is the multi-level and multi-sectorial focus. I know it's very difficult to work together, but under my local experience, small projects are good spaces, a good experience to achieve this, to create trust. For instance, there are experiences about recognition of foreign qualifications or supporting advising in migrant and refugee law. The vitality in the cities has had contribution from people with a migrant background, but this contribution is less visible. Translators, careers, people working in citizen advice, advocates, etc. Cities as Barcelona, but not only Barcelona, have made both the participation of NGO as well as that of migrants and refugees a foundation for their innovation migratory policies, or for changing the focus in universal services or universal policies. For instance, good examples we can find in the reunification program of, or the rethinking process of the service center to attention to immigrants and refugees, or enhancing universal services. The social attention in this moment to immigrants and refugees is very complex. So providing care, training, and continuous support for frontline staff must be a basic element in the local strategies. Finally, establishing better links between reception and intercultural cities and general policies in the city is another challenge to create real inclusion in the cities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gloria, for these words. We very much appreciate them. And now we have Ernesto, who is our very last panelist, and not the least, of course, as we know. And after that, we will have some time, not too much, but some time for questions. We're running slightly out of time, but we are conscious of that, so we are working with that. Ernesto, please.
Thank you, Nuria. Thanks again, everybody, for being here and on Zoom. Thank you for your presentation, Isidre. Thank you for your remarks. Ricard, Xavier, and Gloria, thank you for being here and for being so precise. I wanted to include Gloria because I know she has been working in a lot of very precise programs to welcome immigrants and refugees in Barcelona. She was telling me last time that they had an event before COVID when they knew that there would be youth reuniting with their families in Barcelona or Catalonia, and then invited them to the opera. And then the mayor was there and said, welcome as new citizens of Barcelona. I'll give them a little paper. So it was a very symbolic, non-expensive event for the city of Barcelona, but it meant a lot for the immigrant youth to feel part of their new home. So it's something that the Washington we should do for Central American kids. So I'm going to talk briefly about some findings of my book that match really well with what has been discussed already. So I approached it, I'm talking about field work that I did in 2007, so 15 years ago. So I was approaching this from the point of immigrant integration and trying to measure what that is. But what I was looking for in terms of the ideal outcomes is something very similar to what Professor Zapata described in terms of interculturalism. How do we measure immigrant integration? It can be by looking at official statistics, like Xavier was mentioning, the employment levels of the foreign-born, education levels, etc. Public opinion data are people in favor of regularization or DACA, like most Americans they are. That doesn't mean that that is reflected in laws. So other people look at the laws or the policies on the paper that are important, but don't determine what happens in the streets. Or speeches by politicians, and Donald Trump gave a lot of data for that type of study. But also something that I do is look at this briefly, but mainly focus from the point of view of immigrants or refugees, whatever their status themselves, or the children of migrants. Do they feel at home? Do they feel integrated? Do they feel like the locals? So following some Dutch scholars is the question of integration happens when the immigrant feels at home in the place where they live. So you can approach it in two different ways. It can be objective integration. So I look at historical records, comparative at the surveys, at the interviews, etc. But I'm going to focus today in the urban belonging, which is a subjective feeling, whether they feel at home or not. So this belonging that has been mentioned by other speakers is very important. And it's these beautiful policies that we have discussed, do they then filter down to the immigrant that they feel that there's interculturality? I won't talk about methods right now because we don't have time. But just real quick, to compare in an abstract sense, I want you to focus on the third line. Barcelona has an intercultural model, as Xavier and obviously Ricard has explained. I did this in 2007, so intercultural haven't permeated fully, but it should say not intercultural, that's the model. And that's important because it's setting the pauta, the model for policymakers on how to integrate immigrants. But it's especially important when you compare it to the model of New York, a city of immigration, millions of immigrants for a long time, over a century. Nonetheless, and I think New York is successful in creating cities and city life that is very intercultural in the practice, but there's no policy model. There's no policymakers that really have the budget, the time, the resources to create policies to integrate immigrants proactively. It's a reactive process, and it's really a laissez-faire. Let them figure it out. Let the market give them jobs. Then they can pay rent. They can stay. They cannot afford to stay in New York. They can go to a cheaper place. That's pretty much the policies that American cities have today. We can do better. And another model that is very different, and I would say even worse from the point of view of immigrants, is an assimilationist model, which is represented by the hardcore Trumpian Republican base in the United States, but it's the government policy de facto in France. So even in Paris, a global city, you have that immigrants, wherever they're coming from, they have to learn French right away, speak French like the locals, have no accent, or they'll have consequences that are going to result in discrimination, exclusion, unemployment, etc. So that's not a formula for success. And again, comparing Barcelona comes as a successful experiment. There's also a voice for political participation and collective action. Barcelona has also been and Catalonia in general, the government, as far as I know, provides money, for example, for the Colombian Association, the Peruvian collective in Barcelona, the Chileans, as a religious group, as a national group, as a city group, not so much like in the U.S. when there's money for Latinos, for African Americans, for Asians. Those are big groups. So then the money really depends on who is more organized. In Barcelona, it's like, okay, you want to identify yourself as descendants of Jews from Morocco and you're organizing this cultural event, okay, we'll support it. So that's one of the ways that interculturalism is lived in the cities of Catalonia. And it's important because it provides for this collective voice, this integration, not only on the individual level, that is something that France emphasizes, but something at the collective level that the US has a political tradition of speaking with civil rights, but Catalonia has been able to put some support behind this. And also the economic aspect is very important. In the US, a lot of the migration flows are related to people having jobs. And we see that today. In Paris, there's a strong welfare state, but a lot of times the people are unemployed. So having a strong welfare state and a strong safety net is not enough. And in Barcelona, I think it's good, depending on the economic, the strength of the economy, we have more social provisions or less, more jobs or less. But I think it's a place where, at least before the 2007 financial crisis, combined very well, providing people with jobs so they feel at home and they could pay the rent and make ends meet, and some social provisions as residents of cities in Catalonia. So again, another thing that the US can follow so that immigrants feel belonging. So belonging, based on my interviews, was very low with particularly North Africans or people from North African origin living in Paris, but it was high among Latinos in New York City, although they were struggling a lot to make ends live and make ends meet and have a good life for their families. And it was also very high in Barcelona for the reasons that we have discussed. This is a similar table. So to summarize very quickly the chapters, New York is a situation where there's jobs, there's cultural rights, but there's no papers. And that's not a way to live. That's why we have deportations and the issues that we face in the news. In Paris, you have a welfare state, you have guaranteed housing, guaranteed healthcare, which are fantastic, but you have no cultural rights. There's no interculturalism. This translates in a lot of malaise, in a lot of suffering from immigrants. And in Barcelona, what I like and what I'm glad of having this event today is what I will call deliberate integration. There is a willingness to integrate immigrants as they are into a collective project. And interculturalism gets at that heart. And Ricard's speech was, it's a normative model that is also in practice played, it's done, it's practiced. And it's a good goal to have, that it's good for the immigrants, for the refugees, and for the natives. So that's an example for an old election in Spain, when there's a Muslim woman covered, which is not an issue, like it would be in Paris. It's not an issue in the US, and she's helping Catholic non-vote, and they're just participating in this political project. They have religious difference, but they're in the same project together. So again, the pluribus unum of the idea of the US, and something that Spain has practiced in few decades. There were not a lot of international migrants before the 1990s. So we're talking about 20, 30 years of experience. And I think it's been overall successful. It's not perfect, but it's very good. So to conclude, we can measure subjective integration, whether the immigrants feel at home or not, whether they feel belonging, and objective integration, jobs, healthcare, etc. And then we compare, right? So Mexicans in New York, they feel they can speak Spanish, eat tacos, play soccer, etc., 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 but they have very little legal rights, right? They can be deported, mixed status families, etc. And North Africans have a very good social protections. Most of them are citizens. Most of them are regular, but they have very few cultural rights, particularly as Muslims, caused by the state policies. Latinos in Barcelona feel very well integrated. They have jobs. They have some regulations in the law that help them to become citizens faster than, for example, Moroccans. But they still feel a little bit of tension with the cultural adaptation they still have to do to live in Catalonia or in Spain. North Africans in Barcelona, they put the shirt on. They feel Catalans really fast because they're expecting a lot of discrimination in Spain, in Barcelona, but actually they report racism, but they also report a lot of interaction, a lot of friendships, a lot of dating, a lot of playing, working together with people from different groups. And that makes a big difference from them to feel belonging, and their kids learn Catalan and they feel and do very well. So the best outcome would be like when you have very good subjective integration and very good objective integration, and no city is perfect, but Barcelona is up there. And it depends who you are, how that is felt, the intersectional lens that Isidro was talking about. So I'll finish with this. Thank you so much. We're gonna have now a little break. There should be lunch outside. And I ask you to please come back in 10 minutes. 10.
Do we have time for a few questions?
Oh, yes,
because
yes.
I have been
yes, Nuria, questions first. I jumped the gun. Let's do questions, and then we'll have the lunch. Thank you, Nuria.
Just, I know it's late, so very few questions. If we have some, in this room, please move to the mic if you want to. Otherwise, just oh, and if we have some, a couple of them maybe from the Zoom as well. So while we wait for people moving here, do you want to read a question from the chat? Do we have any at all? We don't? Okay, then, please.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Magali Muria. I come from the delegation of Catalonia. I have a question for Dr. Zapata. The mention of Habermas in your work invites us to flirt a little bit about the idea of an intercultural public sphere. from an outsider, because I'm an outsider to this topic, I see how we could articulate it in the context of physical space. But I am wondering if there's been some exploration about this idea in the context of virtual spaces and possibly mediascapes.
That was for you directly.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. No. Thank you very much. In any case, public space is a key concept also for interculturalism, because interculturalism is promoting contact, and public space becomes the basic space where contact takes place. And of course, that depends what we mean by public space. There are a lot of definitions and so on. And as I try also to say, contact also has many meanings. I see, for instance, the good intention of the Council of Europe, speaking about meaningful contact when speaking, but there are many contacts that are not meaningful and are very important. When you go to the bus, you are black, and you see many aides towards you, and they don't leave you to sit, or you sit and somebody go to another place, because this kind of thing are not meaningful contact, and they are very meaningful. Okay, then just be careful about this kind of good intentional definition, because you are leaving aside many actions that are very important to take and to incorporate within the concept of contact. Having said that, this is very important when we speak about public space, of course. And then I take myself this kind of two kind of meanings. The first one, I hesitate to quote some authors, but I quote Habermas. I appreciate that you take that into account. Public space are open space, and Habermas take this concept as one of the key concepts of all societies. Public space is the space where people meet, and then the worry of Habermas. Habermas take the definition of public space as the space of communication. But the analysis that he did was very critical, because they are not space of communication in the public space, and because they are the market, their consumption, their security, and even myself doing some interviews to young people from migrant origin, not all women and girls are allowed to go to public space. Some girls from Pakistan are forced to go from school to the home and have not public space for them. Then public space becomes something important that to take into account if we take this definition as the space of communication, because this allows us to say that there are many spaces that are public space but are not space of communication. And then we can do this kind of critical diagnosis of that. And then from this point of view, when we take into account that communication in terms of Habermas is very related to interculturalism in this case, then we can have this kind of critical diagnosis of public space today. In terms of communication. The other definition that I take of public space is the urban studies. The urban studies have a very broad definition of public space, streets, avenues, markets, libraries, within a building, outside. Okay, I would say urban, but what is important is that all the space are the space where most of the cities are some, I will say, legislation, some responsibility to frame. And then from this point of view, urban planning is something that sometimes are left aside in diversity debate that are become very important. Urban planning are the, for instance, Marseille. When I went to Marseille, and then I saw that there were public banks that were not withdrawn because the urban planning policy of the right wing was not to promote a space of encounters in the public space, and then the way to avoid that is to withdraw banks and to seat people on the street, to cut the water on the streets, to avoid people and this kind of thing. And then public space become something very important as urban planning, for instance, for intercultural. This is something I would say a pending issue. But from this point of view, the definition of Habermas helped me to say how we need to make compatible a public space with interculturalism as a communication space. This is, I have been a bit long. This is why I read, because I am very long when I speak. But in any case, I hope I answered your questions.
Make it longer.
Yes.
I think Magali was also asking about the media, journalism, and how
That's very important. That's key, I would say. That's key. Journalist is very important. The task of journalists is very important, and there is in the Council of Europe they have already this kind of learning exercise with journalists. But and every city council and region need to have some journalist allies, because journalists not only manage public opinion, but they can build public opinion and they can counteract public opinion. It is not only journalists that try to avoid to link a certain nationality when there is a crime or something like that that's happened. There are some protocol for journalists for that. But the positive news of diversity, the positive news of migration are a responsibility also. And journalists, in this sense, have a lot to do. And I will say that it is very important because of journalism is communication to the society. Most of the ideas of public opinion in society come from the media, from different medias. And this kind of responsibility means also that there cannot be a city strategy on interculturalism. There cannot be a government strategy of interculturalism without a network of journalists helping them together to build this network. Journalists become something very important. This is what it is.
Thank you. We need to allow the Zoom as well, the chat. I think there are some questions, but we're really running out of time. So I would say if you have one or two questions that can be summarized. Who's reading the chat? Oh, you are.
I sent them a message in Zoom that I'm happy to field any questions, and there have not been. So.
Oh, all right. So what I see here, these are not questions. Perfect. Thank you. Anybody else? Just one? We don't have much time, but I think that question covers, that answer covers many questions, I think. All right, then back to you, Ernesto.
Great, and the audience on Zoom, stay with us. We're going to be back in 10 minutes, and you can ask also questions at the end of the next session. So we're going to grab lunch, estirar los pies, walk a little bit, but we'll be back for a great, we call it flash session. We're going to have 7 speakers, but they're going to speak for 5 minutes about research findings on different topics, housing between the US and China, and mobility, Central American minors in Washington, D.C., and that are in the news lead. So we'll be back in a minute, and thank everybody. So there's lunch outside, and if you can, please come back. If you cannot, take lunch and go home, but hopefully you can come back and hear us.
And if you come back really, really quickly. So, you know,
yeah, you can come back in 5 minutes, even better. We can eat here. Thank you. Thank you, Nuria. Thank you, Rika. I learned about that topic. Adelante, adelante, un sándwich. A ver, let me try this. No pasa nada. No, estamos aquí luego al lado. ¿Cuántas personas hay en la audiencia? Se están yendo porque es el lunch, pero acabo de ver como 25. Y estamos grabándolo. Vamos a poner pausa. So thank you very much for hanging in there in Zoom. We're back for the second panel, ongoing research from the Immigration Lab. And just briefly, the Immigration Lab is based at the College of Arts and Sciences here at American University. I am the founding director. Daniel Jenks in the corner there is the deputy director, looking for funds to hire them full-time. Moshir Bobasher, who's going to present, who is our postdoc from Afghanistan, a professor of law there and now teaching at American University, and a number of students, Josh and Isabella Goris, who you're going to hear from in a minute. And we conduct research in all over the world in all types and manners. So we welcome your follow-ups and questions after the event. So without further ado, let me introduce Maria Luisa Rosell, who is an AU alumni. She is also an alumni of AU, a neighbor, a friend of the lab, a personal friend now, say, and NTN 24, which is like CNN of Colombia for Latin America, an international news network. She's a contributor journalist there, and she just ended up a period where she was the managing editor at Telemundo 44, the Spanish language NBC news network in Washington, D.C. So thank you, Maria Luisa. All yours.
So good afternoon, and thank you so much, Professor Ernesto Castañeda. It is really a pleasure to be with you today, and what a great opportunity to learn from such interesting discussions and topics. Next up, we're going to listen and learn about 7 presentations of research related to immigration and integration conducted by researchers and students from American University, members of the Immigration Lab. And topics include different kinds of topics. You know, the presence of Central American minors in our region, Afghan immigrants in our region who are trying to integrate themselves here, disabilities among immigrant communities, border communities, and other topics that are very important and informative. This is a special and unique opportunity for the researchers and for the students of American University that are members of the Immigration Lab to share with you their research, their findings, and most important, the contribution and the impact that this research and findings can have in public policy. So that's why this is so important to be with you today and to share these findings. Thank you for the audience who is virtually participating in this conversation. And so I will remind our presenters that each presentation cannot last more than 5 minutes, as Professor Castañeda stipulated very rigorously. And after the presentation, we're going to have time for some questions. They will very glad to take your questions. So we alterate a little bit the order of our presentation. And the first presenter will be Isabella Goris, Administrative and Student Employee Specialist at the American University Library. Welcome, Isabella. Please join us. I would like to give an applause to Isabella for coming today. She has to go back to work, so we're gonna make this quickly and effective for her to be at her work soon. The title of her presentation is Siempre Pendiente, Expectations and Relationships Between Youth Migrants and Their Sponsors. Isabella.
So my presentation is actually a little different. This one is actually disability among Mexican American. Yeah.
Bella, sorry. keep talking, don't mind me. There we go.
So the
Oh,
presentation.
I'm sorry, I have to correct. Disability among Mexican Americans.
Yes.
Sorry, Isabella.
No, thank you. So yes, my presentation is about disability among Mexican Americans in El Paso. This is actually a team effort with Jessica Chekhov, Bulin Lee, myself, and Ernesto's assistants. So our population demographic consisted of 60% male and 39.3% female, with 77% of our population being citizens and 22.9, so about 23% being permanent residents. A big thing that we noticed, a big trend that we noticed was the generational trend amongst our population, with first gen being the most prominent and third gen and beyond being the least prominent within the population. Of our population, which are those who are disabled in El Paso, a majority of them spoke only Spanish, followed by Spanish more than English only being 10%, English and Spanish, so bilingual, being only 24.7%, English being being the more prominent language spoken was only 19%, and English only was only 6% of our population. So a majority of our population did speak Spanish. So one of the biggest trends that we've noticed with our population was education. So as you can see, those who are disabled are those in blue, those who are not disabled are those in red. Those who are not disabled, a majority of them, up to 30%, got a 4-year degree in university or received a bachelor's degree, while those who were disabled only got to about elementary school. We noticed that there were actually no people in our study that went beyond a 4-year university. So that includes no master's, no professional, and no doctorates. So a majority of our population were lower education levels. That correlates with our next chart, which was employment and disability. Those who were disabled actually had lower level professions, which include unemployment in general, agriculture or forestry occupation. But there were some other services such as police, firefighter, and security that were popular amongst those with a disability. But for the most part, the majority of our population did exhibit professions in lower level career fields. When it came to medical insurance and employment, we noticed that a lot of our disabled population were unemployed and insured through government-aided medical insurance. So a majority of them were unemployed but did have insurance, medical insurance through government aid. Those who were not employed did not have that much medical insurance, about 20% of them. So here are a couple charts between our disability and medical hardship between those who were disabled and those who were not disabled. If we look at our top right-hand corner over here, this is a chart. This is a chart presenting disability by if you decline medical treatment at all. So for those who were disabled, a large majority of them did, not a large majority in total, but in comparison to the non-disabled, did decline medical treatment at some point. When going further, it did not, when it came to financial reasons being the reason for, medical treatment decline, they was about equal. But when it came to medical debt being the reason for medical debt declination, it showed that disabled people actually had more medical debt, which led to more of a reason why they declined medical treatment. And that's the majority of our showings right now. It's still a work in progress as we are collecting more data and creating our paper as we speak now.
Thank you, Isabella. Our next presentation will be done virtually. Our presenter is Melvin Saravia. He's a master's student in sociology, research and practice. And the title of the presentation is Central American Immigrant Youth Experiences from the Sponsor's Perspective. And Melvi will be connected soon with us via Zoom.
Over the summer, my name's Mel. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's having a good time over the summer. My name's Melvin Saravia in this presentation. So just to start off, I want to talk about why we should care in the first place about Central American youth in the DC area. So one big thing I really noticed is the idea of the American dream. Although it's been largely proved to be false through theories like social reproduction, it is the idea that people should be entitled to equal opportunities regardless of their origin. And the youth that come here to this country should have the chance to succeed no matter what, but that can be hindered by their legal status and fear of being deported. Another important thing immigration does is fuel the economy. So whether it be undocumented or documented labor and unpaid labor, although it is a questionable practice, makes for more profits. And it increases the GDP and economic output of this country, as well as having more people purchasing goods in the economy and paying taxes through things like sales tax. And the way many undocumented immigrants are being treated in these detention camps and being separated by their families and being searched without warrants is a human rights violation and a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment, which we will get into a little later. And the Hispanic population is the largest minority in the United States, being 18.7% of the population as of the 2020 census. And it is also the fastest growing. And to just put that into comparison, the Black population is at 12.1%. So just to get into the DC area and the Washington, DC specifically, as of 2020, the Latino population in DC was 11.3%. And of that 11.3%, the vast majority are from El Salvador with 25.1%. And Mexicans and Dominicans being 11.6%. And encapsulating the DMV area, so that includes Maryland and Virginia, there are 800,000 Latinos living in the Washington metro area. So just to get a little context here, the large majority of these people coming from Central America are from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And that is because of a lot of US intervention that went on in these countries. So for example, the US funded military governments fighting communist guerrillas from 1979 to 1992 in El Salvador. And the US was intimately involved in the Guatemalan coup and training Guatemalan security forces that murdered thousands of civilians in the nation's civil war. And Reagan-backed Contras that were using Honduras as an outpost. So this created for a largely unstable and corrupt governments, and the US admitting Central American asylum seekers would be an admitting of wrongdoing. And also nepotism is a really big problem. And here's a little map just to give you context as to how deeply involved the US is in Central America. So just to get into the methods of this particular, essay we're writing with Carissa Stanio is that there was a mixed methods approach to the interviews conducted, which we're basing our essay off of. So interviews were conducted in both Spanish and English. And sampling methods included recruitment through after-school programs, advocacy, and other methods such as snowball sampling. And there were semi-structured interviews with 23 social providers, school staff, community experts, and in the Washington metro area. There were also structured interviews with 41 parents and sponsors of minors who arrived in the region. And participants were paid $25 for their participation, and it lasted from anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes. And the data gathered through interviews was through interviews in the DMV. So no personal information was disclosed. So for example, if we're talking about somebody, it would be a mother from Honduras living in Fairfax County, Virginia. So, and we coded the interviews through in vivo. So anything that was really common, we would code and say, oh, this amount of people are saying that legal status is an issue, for example, which is one of our themes that we got here. So to get into those themes, the three main themes we have are schooling, legal status, and parental problems. And we're going to get into that a little more. So to keep in mind the context of these interviews and when it was during 2017, during the Trump presidency. So a lot of these interviews came from a place of fear of being deported because of the rhetoric that was coming out of that administration. And wait times to get into the US legally are often really long. So many people opt to come through with the help of smugglers, which are called coyotes. And the arduous trip outweighs life back at home. And because of the Trump administration, many of these people were living in constant fear of losing everything they built in this country. And to get into the violation of the Fourth Amendment, federal law states that the CBP can search without a warrant up to 100 miles inland. And that covers 200 million people, which is about 2/3 of the population. And it covers major cities like Chicago, LA, DC, Boston, which have huge Latino populations. And this is a direct, like I said, a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment, which prohibits seizures and searches without cause. And here's a map just highlighting the areas that can be searched. And it's a lot, And this is where most people live, really. So here's a quotation that I have from the legal status side of things. So you can lose it all at a moment's notice. And what it says here is a mother from El Salvador living in Fairfax County says, what worries me about him right now is that we're in a country and his legal status is he's not documented. So it's really the fear of losing everything you've worked so hard for. And one could be living a really safe and not disrupting life and still be considered a threat in the US and be deported for no reason. So another issue we saw throughout these interviews was alienation from parents and guardians. So many parents come from the US before their children. So the idea is to settle and bring their children. So separation can often be for an indefinite amount of time, which causes a rift between children and parents and guardians. So when children do eventually come, the relationship between the parent and child or guardian is often strained because of the time that's been spent away. And many of these children actually feel abandoned by their parents, leaving them in the country for so long. So alienation is a result of a communication breakdown at the end of it. So this quotation, just to give a gist of it, is one of the countless examples of what parents are coming to see with their children, and that's not what they expect. So although these people may be providing materially for their children, there are things that only time can do, and that is building a relationship with your child. So this child was closed off at the beginning, although she warmed up at the end of these interviews. And I believe a lack of understanding between the two parties is to blame, not having an understanding of one another. And many of those parents did recognize that and take the time to understand their child's grievances. So lastly, schooling was an issue. So adjusting linguistically and socially. So that juxtaposed with alienation is a big problem because it leads to bullying, which furthers social marginalization. So many of the sponsors became really involved, making sure that the child's needs were accounted for and the resources, they had resources to bilingual staff. So often the school credits from the native country did not transfer over smoothly. So many of these kids are actually also too old for their grade. So depending on the area, ESL, English as a second language, is provided to help many students learn English, or just having bilingual schools. And it depends on the school district. So some may refer to ELL or anything else like that. So biases against linguistics and cultural differences is what I got from these quotations. So this particular student was ostracized for not speaking English and already had the stressful task of learning a new language adding to that. So this marks the importance of support groups of these students, Central American youth, to meet with one another and talk about those similar experiences and lean on one another. But this particular student noted that things got better with time. So yeah, that is my presentation. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'm sure Professor Castañeda will hand my email. Thank you.
So the next presentation is from Carissa Stanio. She is SIS undergraduate student. The title of the presentation is Siempre Pendiente, Expectations and Relationships Between Youth Migrants and Their Sponsors. Carissa will join us also via Zoom.
And a quick note, Melvin's presentation, Carissa's presentation, and Devlin's presentation build on a project with help from the Provost of American University to get the funding, which was conducted and carried out, managed by the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies. And we interviewed experts that deal with immigrant youth unaccompanied minors. We also interviewed over 20 parents. And more importantly, we interviewed a lot of the children, worked with 68 minors about their experiences moving into the DMV, which means Washington, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. All right, Carissa, all yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Professor, would you prefer that I share my screen with the presentation?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I meant to ask you. Oh, let's make you. You can do it now. Thank you.
Yes. Great.
And make it big so we see. Yeah.
Mhm. All right, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be able to present with you all some work that I've been doing with my colleague Melvin, who just presented as well. He went through a lot of the methods, so for the sake of time, I will skip to that and just start talking about the themes that we were finding under the topic of relationships between youth minors from Central America and their sponsors. Under that topic, we found three main themes in reading through and translating quotes from, translating interviews with the sponsors of these youths. And these were that sponsors had really positive perceptions of their relationships with the youth that led to high expectations for their relationship once they were reunited in the United States, that there were new challenges of cohabitation that came up once the sponsors and the children were united, but that also, despite those challenges, we saw indicators of hope for relationship progression. To start with sponsor perceptions of the relationship, which is where the title of this presentation comes from, when reading through the interviews, we did find sponsors who were talking about the way that they felt like they didn't know the child so well before they came to the United States, but also very many of them who saw their consistent communication with the child through telephone, video chat, things like that, as establishing a strong relationship. An example of that is this grandmother from El Salvador who said, "No, I hadn't," oh, my bad, who said, "No, I hadn't met him. I met him through photos that they sent me." And when asked if she talked to him over the phone, she said, "Yes, I talked with him every time, and I always, from when he was born, have been caring for him. I've been like a mother to him." So despite a lifetime of separation, this sponsor, in common with others, felt like they had a sort of parent-child relationship already going on with the youth before they had met them. So because of that consistent communication, that demonstrates the way that sponsors perceive the relationships to be so strong. They describe themselves very often as siempre pendiente of the youth, meaning that they were always attentive to them and caring for them. And this understandably creates an expectation that when the youth arrives to the United States, that relationship that they formed over a distance will carry over into a relationship that they can have in their home. But during our time reading these interviews, and we found that that expectation wasn't often met. Cohabitation, in fact, came with a lot of challenges that sponsors weren't necessarily expecting after having this perception of a very strong relationship over a distance. In particular, there were challenges with communication, challenges with openness between the youth and the sponsor, and also challenges of obedience because the youth had spent most of their lives having another figure as their parent and the one who was guiding them through their young life. One sponsor articulated the issue of openness very well when she said, "It has been kind of difficult because she doesn't have the trust in me to talk to me about her things or about everything that she has gone through or is going through. And that part has been really hard because I think that despite the fact that a year has passed, she is still that way." So sponsors were noticing the way that the youth were, in a way, shut away from them, even though they were now living together. And one reason that this could be that we found after also reading youth interviews is that the youths have not only gone through all of the regular experiences of life of growing up without having the sponsor around, but also the often traumatic experience of migrating from Central America to the United States without having the sponsor around. So being able to open up to this person who, even though their family is still new to them, is something that's going to take a lot of time. So sponsors are noticing this barrier and are disappointed, but overall understanding and wanting to work towards this new relationship. And another reason that we found through reading these interviews that these challenges may be coming up is that there's a real difference between relatives and family and between having a place to stay in the United States and having a home in the United States. And so even though these youths now have relatives in the United States that they're staying with and they're grateful for that and they all recognize the material benefits to being in this new place, youths are struggling with the fact that their family, the people that they really felt connected with, that they could go to, are now hundreds of miles away. And they are also expected to create a new family-like relationship with a sponsor that they don't actually know all that well, while integrating into all of the other aspects of life in the United States. So that barrier was unexpected, especially for sponsors who perceived the relationship to be so strong and caring before migration. So it can be a confusing period for youth and for sponsors. Despite that, we noticed that there was a lot of hope for relationships progressing that the sponsors expressed. And I think this is encapsulated or proven by the really deep care that sponsors have for the youths. And one father from Honduras put this well when he said, "That was really hard when I made the decision to come here. But really, that's not something one does because they don't love their family, but because they are seeking something better for them." So motivated by this care that they have for the youths that are now living with them, sponsors are willing and ready to put in the work to either strengthen or just create from scratch a relationship with the youth that's now living with them. Some sponsors mentioned using resources that sounded like professional resources, giving them advice about parenting or watching videos about how to connect with the young person in their care. So despite their disappointment about the relationship in person not being the same or not being as strong as they had anticipated it would be, sponsors are understanding of the fact that the youths have been through a lot and that it's going to take time for a strong family-like bond to be established. And one instance of a bond like that starting to be established was this mother from El Salvador when talking about her and her son's communication over things happening at school. She said, "Yes, he tells me everything." And of course, we recognize that there's a difference between a youth being willing to talk to their guardian about their homework assignments or their projects and about their lives before being in the United States and about the journey to the United States and the emotional parts of that. But the fact that this youth is starting to talk to his sponsor about everyday things, establishing a more of the relationship that the sponsor and youth were hoping for and expecting is a good sign for the relationships to be growing in the future. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them after the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Carissa. The next presentation, yes, a round of applause for Carissa. Thank you. The next presentation will be by Josh Dietz, master's student in sociology. The title of his presentation is Internal Immigration and Housing in the United States and China. Thank you, Josh.
Good afternoon. My name is Joshua Dietz. I'm second year. My name is Joshua Dietz. I'm a second year student in the SORT program, Sociology, Research, and Practice. I know we're tight on time here, so I will try to get through this as quickly as possible. This is a project I'm working on in collaboration with a peer of mine, Bulin Lee. He's been doing a lot of the research and analysis on some of these trends within China, while I've been focusing primarily on the immigration patterns in the US. So here's sort of a breakdown of some of the comparative analysis we've been doing between the two countries, looking at the historical trends among the national population in terms of relocation on an annual basis, the types of moves, the trends in different cities where people are relocating to, and then looking at things like renters versus homeowners, the rate of home ownership, and for the US, which states or regions tend to be more sticky or magnetic. So here's a graph. Most of this data is from the US Census Bureau, both in conjunction the CPS and ACS surveys. Looking here is a historical trend or historical graph of the annual move rate since the Bureau began tracking moves on an annual basis. As many of you may be aware, relocation in year over year is at a historical low in the US. And conversely, China's experiencing more of the opposite, right? It's becoming more mobile. There's a lot more migration as people in rural communities and on the outskirts of cities are relocating for job opportunities and work in some of the more major cities. This is something you may not be familiar, but this demographic is typically referred to as China's floating population. That's really based on their system of registration for your permanent residence. It's a little bit different than here, not as easy to just change your permanent address. So a lot of these migrant workers are kind of considered floating because they may be registered in a more rural community, but they're temporarily or even maybe long-term living in a city where they're working. So this chart here just summarizes that population of those who kind of have a dual residency or are migrating to the cities for work reasons. You can see over the last several decades, it's been increasing steadily and hit historic highs as of 2020. Looking at geographic mobility in the U.S. And the types of moves and where the where the decline is occurring. Most of that is primarily occurring among the very local moves, those that are intra-county, people moving a very short distance. When you look here at the purple and blue lines for those who are moving, between different counties, but within the same state or moving between state to state, you can see the levels here in the last decade are relatively consistent. There's been a slight decline for interstate moves in the last few years. But that pink line illustrates that these very localized moves, short distance moves, are where we're seeing the most significant decline on a year-to-year basis. That's just the annual growth rate broken down the same way, inter-county, same county or different state. You can see that purple line there's been negative growth year over year for the last decade. Another trend that we've noticed for the US is city migration and folks moving outwards from principal cities within metro areas. So what this illustrates here is you can see that every year there's a greater number of out migrants compared to in migrants, which is resulting in a net loss in terms of migration. Principal cities being obviously the main hub or the main city that sort of anchors any metro area. This is a chart from the Pew Research Center, speaking on the same trend just in the year 2020, showing that there's the principal cities or those anchor hubs are experiencing more of a net loss in terms of population, where more folks, the suburbs, more folks are moving out towards those suburbs or the regions surrounding the cities, and those suburbs are experiencing net growth, and then the more rural areas are relatively unchanged. This is also looking at the population for the US's largest metro areas. You can see the red line and the secondary axis there is for the top 10 cities, those metros that have a population greater than 5 million. Those are obviously your New Yorks and Chicago's, Dallas, Houston, and so on. Over the last decade, they're seeing a significant decline year over year in terms of population, save for Dallas and Houston, who is in that top 10. But with the aggregate data, it doesn't show that those two metros have seen growth in each of the last 10 years. But then the remaining larger metros, the top 25, top 30, those with a population between 2 and 5 million, they've pretty much seen consistent growth over the last decade. So it's just those very large metros in the US that are seeing a population decline. In comparison, this is a chart illustrating that same trend for the largest cities in China. And you can see here, over the last couple decades, there's been a bit of an ebb and flow or U-shaped trend here, but in the last, well, the chart actually stops at 2014 here, but looking at the last decade, and I know we have other data showing that the trend has continued, you can see that the population is gravitating towards these cities, and these cities are seeing population growth. So more of the opposite effect or opposite trend compared to the US. The stickiest states in the US, these are the states that retain the greatest percentage of the population that's born there. This is the top 10 here, with Texas, North Carolina, and California being the top 3. Some interesting states show up there: South Carolina, Wisconsin, all retaining a high number of residents that are born there. The most magnetic states are those that have the highest percent of population that was not born in that state. Nevada, Florida, Arizona, states where we see over time there's a lot of people relocate there for various reasons. Also, states that have higher percentage or higher populations of foreign-born immigrants. And then something we're also starting to look into and want to continue to conduct research on is just looking at the relationship between renters and homeowners as far as relocation, and also doing that kind of comparative analysis between the US and China. What's evident here in other essays or research has shown most of the decline in relocation is primarily existent among renters. Homeowners really are still moving at the same rate. The large majority or the highest percentage of moves on an annual basis are renters. And that still tends to be the case, but that's where we're seeing the most significant decline over the years. Looking at home ownership in China, here, these are the trends over the last 20 years. Relatively unchanged in terms of total home ownership. Total home ownership, tends to be close, above 85%, closer to 90%. Compared to the US, which was on the decline. It's beginning to increase again, but for the total national population, the home ownership rate tends to be below 70%, more in that like 65, 67% range. So we're still kind of unpacking those trends and what to make of that. And that's all we have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Yeah.
Our next presenter is Bashir Mobashir. He's Afghan scholar in exile, member of the Celebration Lab, of course. And the title of his presentation is Internal Immigration, Housing, Afghans in the DMV, Education and Job Management. Let's give him an applause.
Hello, good afternoon. In this not so summer looking day, or maybe it is a normal summer day in DC, yeah. How would I know? I'm a recent immigrant. I also want to begin my presentation by saying that I'm a big fan of Barcelona Football Club. Or maybe I should say Barcelona Soccer Club. Because in the US, people use the word football for a different game in which you do not use your feet, you use your hands. All right, okay, so my presentation is basically about the ongoing project we have about Afghan recent immigrants, but we do compare them with the Afghan immigrants from the previous times, as well as with immigrants from Ukraine, Central America, and Ethiopia. So to just give you a little bit of a historical background, Afghanistan, well, historically, we have always had people migrating internally or externally to different parts of the world. But historically, you can find like 5 periods where there has been like mass Afghan migration internally or externally. These 5 periods begin with Abdurrahman Khan, who was basically established the first modern Afghanistan with the borders that the country has. But he also, what a historian from the United States, a prominent historian, called the internal imperialism of Afghanistan, where he basically engaged in 40 wars against different tribes and ethnic groups in Afghanistan, beginning with his own tribe. And at the end of his reign, around 60% of one of the communities, the Hazara Shia communities, were either massacred or expelled from the country. And then after that, we had mass migrations because of the Soviet invasion in 1979, then civil war, which followed that, then the Taliban, then the collapse of the Taliban, the establishment of the Islamic Republic in Afghanistan in the past 20 years. And after that, again, the Taliban second reign in Afghanistan, or second ruling in the country. Similarly, we can see different waves of Afghan immigrations happening, or the United States experiencing or receiving different waves of Afghan immigrations. For example, between 1980s and 1990, when the Soviet invaded Afghanistan, around 24,000 Afghan took refuge to the United States, migrated to the United States. That was followed by 1991 to 2000, around 70,000 Afghans migrated to the United States, and then 97 Afghans migrated between 2020, well, that's a wrong number, between 2001 and 2021. So, pardon me for that. And after the return of the Taliban and the retake of Kabul or Afghanistan generally, around 74,000 Afghans migrated to the United States, and that's the number that was reported in the February of 2022. So I guess that around like 80,000 or 90,000 Afghans have immigrated to the United States so far. As I suggested, it's an ongoing research project, so I do not have those fancy and beautiful charts about findings of the research that Josh had and other awesome presenters had. But we do have a number of research questions. These research questions are about, for example, whether and how Afghans have resettled and integrated in the DC area. Around, when we wrote our proposal, around 2,500 Afghans were living in these areas, but now I think it should be more than that. It should be more than 3,000 Afghans, because based on most reports, Afghans either migrate to the DC area or to California. So these are the two places that most Afghans would migrate to. The second question, which is basically the most important question that we're asking in our research project, is their human capital, how they get employed in the United States. And that's basically the main questions we are asking. And whether they are able to get the jobs, similar jobs that they had, for example, in Afghanistan, and whether they are able to redeploy their professional credentials here. And the last question is basically a comparison question about, comparing the experiences of Afghan migrants in the United States with the experiences of refugees from other 4 countries. The research project is reviewed, so congratulations to us. Thanks to Daniel, he worked a lot on that. We have over 30 researchers who are going to, most of them are going to interview the participants. We have around 100 participants to interview. We have already engaged some of them and began interviewing them. And they're going to be paid $50 for interviews. So as I suggested, we do not necessarily have research findings because we haven't collected the data, the interview answers, we haven't analyzed them. But we do have some general understanding of the experiences of Afghans. I myself am an Afghan, a recent Afghan immigrant. And they can establish a number of hypotheses that need to be tested, to get the scientific credentials. Number of things. So one thing is that there are a number of several settlement organizations around this area that are helping Afghan immigrants with their resettlement and even with their employment. But when it comes to their employment, they can only employ them or help them get employed in the low-skilled jobs and career positions. For example, they have contacts with Amazon. They have contacts, for example, with Walmart and a number of other grocery franchises and pencil shops. But when it comes to high skilled jobs, they cannot really help African immigrants. And that's one of the big problems for people, for example, who have been, for example, lawyers, judges, prosecutors, artists, or have these other high professional skills or careers in Afghanistan. They want to pursue the same goals and objectives and careers actually in the United States. I have experienced that as well. There are some hiring corporations, so Robert Half and many other corporations that also tend to help immigrants generally, but also Afghan immigrants, but they also cannot necessarily help when it comes to helping them with the job opportunities in high skilled professions. And that's why I would this with regard to a number of people I've known and I've interacted with, that they have been actually US educated individuals who have been educated in the United States. They took their bachelor's, they took their master's in different fields like in political science, law, and other schools. They went back to Afghanistan because they wanted to, work in Afghanistan, but because of what was happening, they needed to come back. But even these people who already have, educational credentials from the United States schools and universities, they could not find jobs in their own profession or the careers that they desire to have. And therefore, they actually changed their careers. For example, lawyers decided to take courses in IT and became IT officers in different fields. So they also have problems with, for example, resume. I had a lot of problems with my resume. I thought my resume was professional, it looked nice to me. And I gave it to Ernesto and he destroyed it and made a wonderful resume. Thank you so much. Okay, and cover letter as well, because we are talking about different markets, different needs. So the resume that they have built in Afghanistan for the Afghan market is very different from the United States. So in the United States, when you want to apply jobs, you actually need course. You need someone like Ernesto who can help you with creating a wonderful and beautiful resume. So similar thing with the interviews as well as with networking. Networking is very important in terms of finding jobs. And most Afghans who migrate to the United States actually don't have those networks, so they lack opportunity. And online job hunting platforms, I guess I already talked about it. Companies like Robert Half, they can help you in terms of finding jobs, but not necessarily when you're looking for, let's say, a position in academia or, for example, something like that. So I guess that's all I can say at the moment. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you for sharing. Next is Karina Cioni, program coordinator of the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies here at American University. The title of the presentation is Immigration Realities. And I believe she's going to join virtually, right?
That's right. She's here on Zoom. Go ahead, Coco. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you. Oh, am I frozen?
Yes, we can hear you okay. So you should.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Karina Cioni, and some of you may know me better by my nickname, Coco, from the Immigration Lab. I am the program coordinator at the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies, which is co-sponsoring this event today. And I am going to share my screen now and show you my presentation. So bear with me one moment. Can you all see this? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So Immigration Realities is the name of a forthcoming book written by myself and Dr. Castañeda. I am a former member of the Immigration Lab and current collaborator I graduated in 2021 from the sociology research program at AU. And the book really came about after the kind of chaos of the 2016 presidential US election, which brought about a lot of very old historic myths about immigrants and immigration, not only in the US, and this happens globally. And this book seeks to disprove these myths with reliable, up-to-date, and interdisciplinary research done by researchers within and outside the US, so it takes an international approach. It seeks to do that, but also explore the roots of these myths and try to understand, why do these myths keep cycling back and forth into and out of mainstream global social currents? And we do this with the help of a case study, a survey of 1,152 Hispanic people living in El Paso, Texas, conducted by Dr. Castaneda during his time teaching down there. And let me make this a little bigger. Okay. So we do this in 10 chapters, well, 9. The last chapter is more of a discussion than a review and kind of disproving of the myth. But I'm going to quickly go through these chapters. I'm going to keep this under 5 minutes, I promise. The first chapter disproves the myth that the US-Mexico border is not safe. The US-Mexico border is safe for white Americans. It is actually one of the safest areas in the entire country for white Americans. Cities near the border actually have incredibly low crime rates. It's actually not safe for people of color, Americans of color, as well as immigrants, especially immigrants of color. And we know this because of the high rates of violence committed against immigrants by US Border Patrol and by vigilantes. We've seen this in the El Paso shooting that happened in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, and other Border Patrol policies that seek to harm immigrants instead of help them. The second chapter, we discuss that border walls do not keep immigrants out of a country. And in this chapter, we kind of discuss how the majority of undocumented immigrants in the US currently actually have overstayed their visas. There is a very strong narrative that people are physically crossing the border at parts where there is no fence. And that's actually not true. Of course, it's happening, yes, but the majority of the time it is not. The third chapter, we discuss how immigrants do not commit more crime. This is a very prevalent myth that keeps resurfacing throughout time. This has been around since the United States has been a country. It's been around since the 1800s. And in this chapter, we really explore the idea and the laws around public charges. So the law that Trump sought to update, and Trump sought to really implement more stringent income restrictions against immigrants coming into the United States. They were shortly implemented, and then the Biden administration shut them down. But the public charge myth has existed since people were coming through Ellis Island and Angel Island. Immigrants back then were also charged as public charges and were put back on boats to sail across back to Europe. The next chapter, immigrants do, and they want to learn a new country's language. There are just so many factors related to language learning that we could not possibly get into them right now. But what I will say is that we know that political and social contexts are incredibly important in integration, right? There have been more reports of ICE agents and arrests occurring since the 2016 election in institutions where English is taught to immigrants. I myself used to work as an ESL teacher, and working in an ESL school, we actually were not allowed to really advertise our services from the outside because of that fear. The next chapter, we discuss how immigrants do not drain welfare, another very prevalent myth. And this is just not true on a global scale. And we give examples from Scandinavia, Australia, Europe, and the US to illustrate this. How, and in the US, how immigrants generally do not have access to Social Security. They don't have access to Medicare. They have access to different forms of welfare that pay them less. So on a global scale, immigrants do not have access to very much welfare, and they are, on a global scale, given less resources than native-born people in countries. The next chapter remarks on remittances and how they do not drain local economies and how they should not be taxed. There is a very intense, there's a lot of dialogue about remittances needing to be taxed. Remittances are already taxed. They are wages, right? And immigrants do contribute to local economies by putting money into local economies because they live in these local places, right? And remittances are actually, we found throughout our research, we found that remittances are stronger and more helpful around the world than foreign aid. You know, they help spur economic development around the world. And what would taxing these remittances do? It would increase the amount of remittances going through informal channels. Then the next chapter, we go into the refugee crisis, and we discuss how there is no refugee crisis as we know it. Now, hear me out. I know that this is a little bit controversial of a topic, and you know, of course, we can't get very much into it now, right here, right now. But in this chapter, we really discuss how crisis discourse focuses very much on infantilizing, victimizing, criminalizing, and blaming refugees for national issues, right? It sows polarization, right? And what it does, it ultimately does not address the root causes of mass displacement. And it distracts from that. It distracts from the fact that imperial histories, right? Modern harmful neo-colonial conditions and the refusal of post-colonial powers to truly reckon with their part and their responsibility of creating environments that then create displacement. So really, we discuss how Western media promotes this idea of a refugee crisis and ultimately uses it to the West's advantage. Furthermore, we discuss globalization and migration and how they are independent processes. Migration, as we know, has been occurring since the beginning of time, the beginning of, you know, humanity. And globalization, it's very tough to be able to connect these two, even though there is a lot of research on the two as dependent processes. Globalization does not have a one specific definition. It's actually defined differently depending on the field you are in, depending on the research being done. And so we kind of remark on this and how the two are actually more independent than what is portrayed now. The ninth chapter, which is the last myth, is a discussion on Brexit and how Brexit will not stop immigration to the United Kingdom, which is what the pro-Brexit, the pro-Brexit discourse really focused on to gain voters, right? They said, no more immigrants, immigration is going to go down. Well, all the numbers show now that that actually has not happened. Yes, EU immigration has gone down, of course, because pulling out of the EU means that the UK has different policies now for EU immigrants. However, the numbers have not lowered for international immigrants not from the EU. And so we discussed that, and we discussed the history of how the US and the UK are really actually connected in the types of myths that have historically been about pertaining to immigrants and immigration. The 10th chapter is more of a discussion on successful integration policies that have been applied around the world in different places, particularly in Barcelona, Paris, and New York, and how there are successful and not successful lessons that we can learn from when we're thinking about and ultimately applying policies that impact immigrants and, most importantly, impact their abilities to integrate into their new countries. The book will be out in spring 2023. It is being published by Columbia. And once again, thank you for having me here, and thank you for allowing me to talk a little bit about the book.
Thank you, Karina.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next presentation, which will be the last one, Daniel Jenks will talk about Central American youth and family integration. Daniel Jenks is the executive director of the Immigration Lab here at MIT. Thank you, Daniel.
All right, so a lot of this kind of already covered, but just to kind of bring some of it in and wrap some of it up and add a little bit of depth to certain areas. So like you can see, this is about the Central American youth integration in the US based on the same studies that Melvin and Carissa's presentations were on. I have obviously a much longer version, I guess, like everyone else does too, right? But so I'll be kind of going quickly over these things and just kind of covering some broader themes. Dr. Castañeda and I have been working on a book that will be out hopefully early 2023. And kind of, I think we have 3 core takeaways. And the highlighted one is the one that I think we really do in the book. And the first 2, I think, are important pieces of background and pieces of our argument. So first, we argue that the migration trend seen today of youth from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras is largely connected to 200 and more years of colonialism, imperialism, and interventionism on the part of the United States and others, which of course includes restrictive and reactionary US immigration policies during the Cold War. So Cold War asylum policies that dictated who got asylum and who didn't, the rise and development of MS-13, things like that. So second, during the Trump presidency, families were separated at the border forcibly for the first time, which was a big media spectacle. Obviously, that was bad. However, the global economic system has indirectly created this family separation for decades by creating a demand and a system that supports cheap labor by largely undocumented people from poorer countries than the United States. But of course, we also see this process in other nations like the United Kingdom. And so then third, and again, I think this is the bulk of the book, is our insights on family reunification, the idea of integration and what it looks like for youth and families and how it's unique for youth and families. I think Carissa and Melvin were talking a lot about that, as well as the implications on this for immigration policy, and including how we can create policy landscapes, right? Create that deliberate integration to allow youth and families to heal from traumatic experiences and find home and belonging in their new environments. So just on background, here are 2 quotes from youth who were interviewed for the study on why they migrated. Daniela, who is 16 at migration, wanted to come to the US to live with her dad. And Alberto, who was 14 at migration, wanted to escape a life that felt very dictated by gang recruitment and gangs and gang violence. So of course, the trip north is notoriously one of the more dangerous land routes in the world. It can take weeks or months. It's very expensive. So families have to really take a lot of time to raise money for this trip. And since the recently reinstated Remain in Mexico protocols, the border camps near the border on the Mexican side are also notoriously pretty dangerous places that kind of are created by a type of remote control policy of migration from the United States that tries to deal with migration policy before migrants even get to the borders of the United States or another nation. Family unification, something that Carissa and Melvin already spoke very eloquently about. Many respondents hadn't seen their parents since they were very young. And so this really makes you know, a situation where you really have to totally get to know your family all new, deal with, you know, maybe new family members. You know, a lot of times the parents have to be working a lot for low wages. So there are often cramped quarters and busy schedules. And of course, this is also occurring alongside the acculturation process, learning how to exist in a new school, a new community, learning the new language, making friends, things like that. And lastly, in the kind of third major area is that in school systems, this is kind of the main area that the state interfaces with youth after they, other than courts, after they migrate. So some challenges include language barriers, students with interrupted formal education, dealing with a history of trauma, and also cultural changes in schools as the demographics of those schools change kind of rapidly sometimes. So solutions for that include English as a second language programming, entirely newcomer programs to help students really kind of get on their 2 feet and learn how to succeed in the classroom and learn their next steps. Bringing in trauma-informed counseling, and then also hiring new staff and creating new administrative pathways for things like school registration. So that's my 5-minute presentation. I'm happy to send you the long one if you want it later, but thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to all the presenters and thank you for sharing your research. It's really enlightening. I think Professor Castaneda wants maybe to do some closing remarks, and thank you for the delegation of Barcelona. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margarita. Any burning questions for the presenters? Follow-ups? No, from anything from Zoom? Any comments, questions? Dana?
I don't see any coming in, but feel free to send them if you have them.
Yeah, so even though we're gonna conclude, if you have any, you can always send us an email and we'll be happy to continue the conversation. So we ran out of time. I haven't done an event in a couple of years and it shows, but it's my fault, not the colleges. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you again for the co-sponsorship. Thank you, Ricardo, for being our main speaker. Thank you, Margarita, for the presentation. And I'm glad you got to see some of the stuff that is happening at the Immigration Lab and the ongoing work. And I think I'm biased, but I think all the students and postdocs and faculty members are doing a great job on research on migration topics. So without further ado, we'll finalize the event here, and but hopefully we can chat those that are in presence. And thank you everybody on Zoom, and we'll have this recording online in a couple of days. Thank you everybody. Have a good afternoon. Gracias.